9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is the DSR Podcast. Hello and welcome to Deep State Radio here in the darkest depths of the summer. I'm David Rothkopf, and I am joined, of course, by Rosa Brooks of Georgetown University Law Center, who's off someplace else, distant. How are you, Rosa?
I'm very well, David.
Excellent. And by Ed Luce, who I know is here in Washington because I've been hearing him complaining about it ever since he arrived. How are you, Ed?
I'm good in spite of having returned to Washington.
Well, you know, somebody has got to be here and keep an eye on things, and I'm glad that it's you. I'm right outside of Washington, and frankly, I try not to go in unless I absolutely must. Well, let me start with this, Ed, because I know you were off. Our listeners, because they're very plugged in, they know that every summer all the world's elites go off to these kind of retreats, and they plan out everybody's lives. They sign into secret documents and so forth. And one of the cabals that does this is the Aspen strategy group. And I know you were there. And I don't want you to divulge anything. I know everything is in like Chatham House rules or some kind of crazy stuff. But what I'd love to do, before I welcome Kori Schake, who I see has also joined us, is I'd love you to give us a little bit of a readout, something that struck you. Not everything, don't divulge any confidences, but something that struck you at the Aspen strategy group.
Well, it's a good question because I was there. I mean, I have to make it correct. I'm shocked that I have to make this correction, David, because it's to you. But there is only one Chatham House rule. And you said Chatham House rules. And it's just intolerable.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah. I mean, I knew it.
Needed a pedantic start to the day.
Yeah. Kori was gone for 30 seconds. And she is the one who's supposed to be doing that.
She is.
That's my lane, Ed.
But I had queued that up before you came on, Kori. And, once I've committed.
And maybe there are secret rules that they just don't tell you about.
Yeah.
There could be.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, in full disclosure, my wife directs the Aspen strategy group. And I believe that she would divulge other secret rules to me.
Sure.
If they were being imposed on. But I mean, it was a very unusual. I've been, several times. And as you say, it's kind of a sort of smaller version of the Munich security conference that happens every February in Munich. I've been several times, but I've never been to an Aspen security forum like this because on the Monday, it was due to start on the Tuesday, on the Monday of last week, Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, pulled every single DOD participant in the conference, including several combat commanders, other senior officials. And then about an hour later, a bunch of other Republicans took Hegseth's cue. And the justification for pulling all these participants, administration participants, was that Aspen is an evil globalist organization. That's verbatim, evil globalist. And if if Aspen's evil and globalist, goodness knows, what either word really. Well, globalist for sure, but the word evil is, I think, to put it mildly, misapplied in this case. It's a very earnest exchange of, private and public panel events and private meetings in which people from outside of the United States come, not just from allied countries, but from, other militaries, other intelligence services, other defense sectors and mainstream political figures, and is extremely useful, not least for combat commanders who love coming to the Aspen Security Forum. So it did kind of upend the whole event and give it a certain flavor, which I haven't detected before. But the discussion is very earnest. It's all in public. There isn't even a Chatham House rule. There's nothing that could possibly be presented as conspiratorial or yes, let alone evil about this event, which nevertheless, because my wife was a battlefield surgeon in her previous life, was triaged back into being an exceptionally interesting and good conference. I'm sorry not to give you anything more.
That was, I got to tell you something. That was a completely useless answer. You didn't give us anything about the meeting. But nonetheless, because this is not my first job moderating, I can pick up on that and say, Kori, one of the things that Ed just said in trying to avoid saying anything about what happened there was that that the United States administration, the Department of Defense and others decided not to attend, which frankly, I'm sure there was nothing that happened in any of the sessions that was more interesting or significant of where we are than that. That, you know, that their absence said something. What do you think?
So I think the Department of Defense needs the Aspen Strategy Group more than the Aspen Strategy Group needs the Department of Defense. And I think all of us should push back on the notion that globalist is allowed to be used as an insult, as opposed to Americans who think about engagement with the world and how to make it in American interests. So this is more performative nonsense from the Trump administration, and in particular from Secretary Hegseth. I understand, since the Chatham House rule has been violated by people who are not Ed Luce, I understand that at one point, our friend and Deep State Radio colleague David Sanger pointed out on a panel that it was really dumb of the administration not to show up at Aspen and crow about the success of their attacks on Iran. And I think that's actually a really good point. David is exactly right.
Wow.
That in fact, it would be in the administration's interest to try and persuade precisely the kind of people who are curated to participate in the Aspen Strategy Group of the merits of their different approach to the world.
Well, that's an interesting point. I know Rosa used to raise her children by threatening them that if they did not behave, an evil globalist would come out from under their bed.
It's me.
Yeah, it was right, exactly. Kori Schake. First of all, I just want to.
I used to threaten that they would just have to spend all their summer vacations at strategy group meetings.
Yeah, well, that'll do it.
And then, like Pete said, they didn't think that was a cool summer fun idea for a kid.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not. But, you know, Rosa, since then, you know, there's been more news about Pete Hegseth. He apparently can't hire a staff. Nobody wants to be the chief of staff of the Department of Defense, which is actually a fairly significant job. And apparently the place is in chaos and people are getting together and they're going to like write a letter and say Pete Hegseth isn't up to this job, which I could have written that letter, you know, months ago. But in any event, the Pentagon is in disarray. Do you hear these rumors and do you give any credence to them?
I do hear these rumors. And the rumors clearly are based in fact. The Pentagon is in disarray. You start firing people right and left, and that's pretty much what happens in any institution, especially when the firings appear to have no rational basis except for, you know, people who pissed off Donald Trump or Pete Hegseth at one point, plus a little dose of randomness thrown in just to mess with everybody's minds. I mean, yes, it's in total disarray. I think it's a symptom. It's both a special disarray. It's a sort of like Tolstoy, right? Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. There is every Trump administration agency in disarray is in disarray in its own special way. So Pete Hegseth's unique style is adding an extra layer of chaos to everything at the Pentagon, because he seems, as you said, he seems to be completely incapable of keeping any senior staff who don't either quit or get fired within weeks of being hired. And usually when they go, they go, well, you know, with a few tell-all leaks in the process saying what a jerk he is and how incompetent he is. So they seem to be even more in disarray than most agencies. I think it'll be really interesting. I also have seen the rumors that senior staff, including senior military officials, are circulating some sort of internal letter calling for his ouster because he's essentially incompetent. I'm a little bit skeptical that this will actually happen, or that if it happens, it will have senior people who aren't already on their way out the door signing off, because of the climate of total fear that Trump has succeeded in created throughout the administration. So it will be interesting to see if that goes forward. I mean, it's quite clear that if you did a secret ballot poll of senior military officials and civilian officials at the Pentagon, that it would be 9-1. This guy is incompetent. He needs to go. But I think it speaks to how frightened everyone is. Our friend of Deep State Radio, Frank Kendall, former Secretary of the Air Force, had a op-ed in the Times the other day commenting on how unprecedented that climate of fear is, and he tells a story that I think all of us here can relate to. During the Bush administration, he was one of the many people who said the U.S. should not be using torture, and he said he remembers saying to other colleagues, despite the fact that we're so upset that the U.S. in our view is heading in the wrong direction when it comes to the use of torture, at least we live in a country where we can speak out against our own government, be sharply critical of our own government without fear of retaliation. You don't have to think, well, if I say George Bush is a bad guy, he shouldn't be allowing this, that I'm going to go to jail. It's safe. And he said that's just not true anymore. That doesn't feel true to people anymore. Right now, people, when we've got former President Obama being accused by Trump of treason, that really does create a climate of fear.
Kori, you wanted to gesticulate or say something?
I do want to add something. I agree with everything Rosa said, but I do not want to cede my signet ring of pedantry to Ed Luce. And so I feel the urgency to say that it would be a really bad thing for active duty military people to organize a letter criticizing the Secretary of Defense's suitability for the job. That is actually above their pay grade, and it's bad for civil military relations. For the active duty, that is Congress's job. That is the civilian leadership's job. It's a dangerous thing to allow the military to decide in a free society which civilians are suitable to direct policy.
Kori, I would agree with you, but I think we may be at a moment where that has changed. I mean, and as you know, I've sometimes argued that there is a danger of letting some of our norms about civil military relations become kind of rules of etiquette more than anything else, where we're drawing distinctions that have no real difference. And I think, all of us, I think this is a really hard question, right? I mean, all of us as a general matter think the military should not be politicized. I think we all agree with that. Equally, I think all of us could come up with some extreme hypothetical, your Holocaust type of hypothetical, where quite clearly it would be the moral duty of a senior military personnel, no matter what the chain of command, to speak out, even if they were doing so publicly against the civilian leader. And somewhere in, we're in the gray area in between, right? And I think the question for all of us is sort of how close are we to those moments where you just have to speak out because things are that bad. And I mean, I should also note for our listeners, we have no idea if the rumors of this letter are accurate or not. And we don't actually know that senior active duty military commanders are planning to sign on to anything. And as I said, I'm actually pretty skeptical that would happen. So I think we're talking about a hypothetical. But I don't think any of us want to. I don't know that I would want to say that I can't imagine things getting to the point where it is a moral duty, regardless of chain of command, et cetera, to speak out, regardless of civilian control of the military norms. Are we there yet? Maybe not. But clearly there's a point where you get there.
So speaking of the gray area in between, Ed, what do you think of this?
I think I don't wear signet rings, so Kori should keep her signet ring.
I thought that, by the way, was perfect, because people who wear signet rings are often pedants. And,
Yeah.
Is there a secret deep state radio signet ring? There should be
It
one.
should be.
it's a secret, isn't it?
I think we should be told. I think
Yeah, we should be.
The
You
people
should
want to
be.
know.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I only have one thing to add to this, which is, what I should have said in my first answer is Hegseth is an imbecile. And, Kori and Rosa will agree on that.
Yes.
And I think they will agree that, regardless of whether it is proper in this situation for people inside the Pentagon to make any public protest over the quality of their Secretary of Defense, the man is an imbecile, and it would be a 9-1 at least vote on that. And I do know that the combat commanders and others were mortified to be pulled out of this thing, and it wasn't just them. It was like there's a Rising Leaders program attached to Aspen, of young people in their early 30s, and there was a couple from distant commands who'd flown across oceans to get to Aspen and had to turn back because it reached down to those levels. It was an absolute uniform ban. And all it does is expose the shallowness, performative imbecility of a man who should never have got near that job and who is a danger to us all while he's in it.
So let me ask you a question, because it's the middle of the summer. I pick up the news. Well, I haven't picked up a newspaper in years, but I look at the newspaper online. I see what's in the newspaper every day. It's Epstein, 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 all those Epstein stuff. And yet, here's what I'm getting from you guys. The Secretary of Defense is an imbecile. Nobody will work for him. The Department of Defense is in chaos. There are wars and things going on in the world. The Secretary of State has just, A, fired a bunch of people out of the State Department, and B, issued a statement, which I found astonishing, and nobody picked up on this, saying that anybody who speaks on behalf of the State Department should make every effort to think of what the president would say and say that. I mean, there's a memo that was circulated at the State Department that said this, which is kind of stunning. We don't have, Kori, I'm going to go to you with this, but we don't have a National Security Council to speak of. We don't have a National Security Advisor. There's no process going on there. The president doesn't get briefed. I just did a Need to Know podcast with Tim Weiner, who writes about the CIA. There's a new book out called The Mission. And he referred to Tulsi Gabbard as a crackpot and John Ratcliffe as a hack. So the intelligence community is led by crackpots and hacks. There's nobody leading the National Security Council. The State Department's led by an imbecile. The Pentagon is led by an imbecile. The State Department is melting down around us. AID is gone. Doesn't this strike? I mean, shouldn't people be a little more alarmed that the national security apparatus of the United States is, burning out before our very eyes?
Yes.
Thank you. And over to you, Rosa. No, go. Perhaps you elaborate.
I agree with your judgment, David, that the intelligence community, or I should say at least the DNI, is ridiculously politicizing the intelligence community, and in ways that have nothing to do with the actual function of her job. It's less clear to me that the CIA director is doing his job catastrophically. I see less evidence of that. You're clearly right that there's no national security process. There's no interagency coordination. None of the kind of people raising ideas that then get vetted by stakeholders within the government before they become policy. And so that's why we get the cabinet of amplifiers racing to try and publicly state what they think the president is going to say. And we just saw a couple of genuinely destructive exercises of it from the Defense Department. The uncoordinated announcement that the US government was reconsidering the AUKUS treaty with Australia and Britain, which nobody had consulted allies or the White House about before DOD made the announcement. And the second, the cutoff of aid to Ukraine, which the White House then reversed because the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy apparently determined on his own, without the approval of the Defense Secretary or the White House, and over the objections of the military, who said, we don't need these weapons for a potential war in China. It's more important for Ukraine to win in Europe in order to deter China from starting a war in Asia. But they nonetheless effectuated the cutoff of aid to Ukraine. And it took a heroic effort to get the White House to know it was happening and reverse it. And I think that's going to be the pattern of policy in the Trump administration, right? Sub-cabinet officials taking initiative to do destructive things that the White House will then claim to have no knowledge of. And the cabinet officials are incapable of understanding what's going on in their own departments.
So, Rosa, it appears that the ship of state is a ship of fools. It's headed in the wrong direction. It's taking on water, and there are icebergs ahead. We used to regularly turn to you and say, do we have a constitutional crisis? And you would say, well, no, not quite yet. But this seems like some kind of crisis to me. But maybe I'm just alarmist and, overstating it for podcast effect.
It seems like a crisis. I don't know that it's a constitutional crisis. As I've said
No,
before.
it's not. I'm not saying that. It's just a crisis.
Killer old crisis. It's just a plain old crisis. Yeah, of course. And I mean, I think Kori is absolutely right. It's not even clear you can speak of the U.S. as having a foreign policy at this point. We seem to have several different foreign policies, sometimes competing with one another. I don't even think it's weird for there to be a memo saying, hey, people, if you're speaking on behalf of the State Department, try to think of what the president might say. Every administration has to police its people and make sure that they are not getting quote unquote ahead of the president on anything. And I think all of us, with the exception of Ed, who has journalistic integrity, all of us have worked for presidential administrations and political appointee positions. We've all seen or experienced getting sort of slapped down if you use a word that the White House has decided it doesn't like anymore. And sometimes you don't even know what that word is, right? But until you would use it by accident, then suddenly you're told, no, we don't say that anymore. You can't say that, whatever. So that's not unusual. I think, in fact, we can all think of ridiculous examples of people getting yelled at by the White House for using some phrase that was the term of art until suddenly it wasn't the term of art and they didn't get the memo. They were not allowed to say it anymore. That's not weird. I think the problem, the really problematic aspect and I pity these poor people at the State Department of saying, think of what the president might say and then say it, is not that that's sort of bizarre and unprecedented especially for political appointees who are supposed to be representing the president's views. The problem is that since Donald Trump will just say whatever random thing comes into his head and then contradict himself 5 minutes later, there's really no way to know what the president is likely to say because it's not clear the president has any idea what the president is likely to say, which just takes us back to that original challenge of, we don't have one foreign policy, we have multiple foreign policies. In fact, President Trump himself sometimes seems to have multiple foreign policies within the space of about half an hour. There's just no coherence whether you're trying to be I pity these poor Trump administration appointees who are attempting to be, obsequious, subservient loyalists. Even they can't get it right because there's no possible way to know what President Trump is going to want you to say or do at any given moment. And he will repudiate you in a millisecond if you screw up.
So I want to get to our big finish here, but as everybody knows, first part of the podcast is available to everybody. The last part, the big finish, is available to members. So we're going to have to say goodbye to people who are non-members right now. Go sign up, be a member, listen to the rest of it. And for those of you who are members, hang on. We'll be right back.